Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Kim. I'm a research fellow at KaiPak. Thanks for joining us today for the Roundtable on U.S. nuclear energy policy. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Saunders, who brings deep expertise on U.S. national security and energy policy. Paul is president of the Center for the National Interest and a leading expert on U.S. national security and great power competition. His work focuses on strategic intersection of foreign policy, energy, and geopolitics, with particular expertise on U.S. relations with Russia, East Asia, and key U.S. allies, including South Korea. In addition to leading the center, he's a senior advisor at the Energy Innovation Reform Project and a principal advisor at CNA Corporation. There, he has supported to work on foreign and national security policy for many years. Earlier in his career, he served in the State Department as senior advisor of the Under Secretary of State for Global Affairs during the Bush administration. What about you? Paul, thank you very much for being with us today. I'd like to begin with a few broad questions to set the stage and then gradually move into South Korea US cooperation and policy implications.
Sure. No, well, thank you. I'm really delighted to be with you.
Sure. So last May, President Trump signed four executive orders aimed at expanding US nuclear energy. For those who are not energy experts, why has nuclear energy become such a high priority for the US right now?
Well, I think there are really a variety of reasons for that. Um, One is, I guess I would say, strategic,
Mhm.
and that links to the Trump administration's kind of energy dominance agenda, and we might talk a little bit more about that. But I think one element of it is for the United States really to be uh, as independent in energy terms as is realistically possible. And there, nuclear energy certainly can make an important contribution. I think another element of it is the president's goal to kind of drive down electricity prices and energy prices in the United States, and really to produce as much energy of every different type. And that relates partly to driving domestic growth.
Mhm.
It also relates to boosting American competitiveness internationally. And if you listen to administration officials, I think more and more of them talk about energy prices as really being a fundamental component of America's global role and again, global competitiveness, especially in the age of artificial intelligence, when you can really translate energy, into computing power and the ability to solve problems. And, just to give you a little flavor of this, I listened recently to a senior administration official speaking at an event who said, no, we shouldn't call them data centers. We should
Mhm.
call them intelligence factories. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That kind of I think illustrates part of what the administration is trying to do. The last two things I would say, just looking also internationally, first, I think the administration really wants to be in a position to help American allies to be kind of independent themselves. And one especially good example of that is, the European Union which of course had been very dependent on Russian energy, and following the Russian invasion of Ukraine,
Mhm.
has had to not fully sever, but has, you know, very severely reduced its purchases of energy from Russia. And that's had consequences for Europe. And I think the administration wants to help Europe and other allies not to be in a position like that. But finally, also, they clearly see American energy as a source of geopolitical influence and even leverage.
Mhm. I think that's fantastic. You just gave us like four big factors why those are driving the U.S. Nuclear energy policy, like focus. So we're gonna unpack that throughout these questions that I'm gonna ask you. So the first, I wanna see the difference between like what Trump is doing right now versus Biden. Like how does Trump's approach differ from the Biden administration's approach?
Sure. Well, look, I think the Biden administration was also pretty supportive of nuclear energy. And really, I would say over the last probably 15 years almost in the United States, we've had uh, pretty good bipartisan support for nuclear energy. For people who aren't really intimately familiar with American domestic politics, I would say historically, Republicans have been quite supportive of nuclear, although, at times in the past worried about the cost, if there were government expenditures involved. Uh, Democrats really historically had been, quite skeptical
Mhm.
toward nuclear energy. And what really happened in the United States during the Obama administration, which of course, 2009 to 2016. What really happened during the Biden administration is you saw Democrats divide over
Mhm.
nuclear energy. And some Democrats, I think probably a minority of Democrats at this point, remained really strongly opposed to nuclear for largely for environmental reasons. Um, but for Democrats who cared more about climate change and combating climate change,
Mhm.
nuclear energy really became a key part of the solution because of its ability, to provide this low carbon, so-called firm
Mhm.
power,
Mhm.
continuously on. So once the Democrat side kind of fractured in that way, we've had a pretty durable congressional majority in support of, I won't say every single thing, but in support of nuclear energy generally. Again, over, I would say, roughly the last 15 years. But as you can tell from what I just said there, that they're kind of different drivers.
Mhm.
So for Democrats, it's really very substantially about addressing climate change and reducing
Mhm.
carbon dioxide emissions from the U.S. energy system, especially from electricity, where for Republicans, it's much more about having kind of a secure, reliable supply of power. And then there's also this kind of national security, international dimension of nuclear energy, and it's the fuel cycle and
Mhm.
linkages to the nuclear weapons complex and a whole host of other issues.
I think that you did a fantastic job of explaining how the U.S. like domestically is divided about the nuclear energy and how things are kind of converging nowadays. So it sounds like, to me, the US is looking for faster, cheaper, and safer ways to expand nuclear capacity. And it sounds like smaller modular reactors or SMRs might be one of solutions here. And they are actually getting a lot of attention. So can you explain SMRs to a non-technical audience and why policymakers see them as important for U.S. nuclear strategy and alliance cooperation?
Sure, sure, sure. So, in terms of what they are, I think that the basic concept is that in traditional large scale nuclear power plants and nuclear reactors of the type that United States and Korea use today for electricity generation. The commercial idea driving those reactors was that you would build kind of something very large and just build a small number of them. And you would get an economy of scale from building these really, really big projects. Uh, the concept behind the small modular reactors is kind of the opposite of that. That we will build something, small enough that we can build a lot of them, and we can build more of them in factories and then just assemble on site versus kind of every single reactor is different, construction on, or every plant, I should say, is different, construction overwhelmingly at the site. And that you get the economy of scale through numbers rather than through size. So that's the basic concept behind it commercially. Uh, the actual size of the designs, varies pretty widely, by really, frankly, a factor of more than 100, because, there are some people talking about so-called micro reactors, that might be like 1 or 2 megawatts of capacity. And then there are others, with designs that are like 300 megawatts, 345 megawatts, compared to, again, a traditional reactor that might be, 1,000 megawatts, or in the case of Korea's newest nuclear reactors, the APR 1400, 1,400 megawatts. So, the kind of size range, of these small reactors, is actually very wide. Uh, the other thing that's important to understand about them is that there are kind of multiple different technological pathways for building nuclear reactors. And the nuclear reactors that we have operating commercially, in the United States today, and in really almost everywhere around the world, not entirely, but almost everywhere, are kind of traditional light water reactors. And some people, like the American company NuScale, want to build just like a smaller version of that. Uh, but there are others, like some may be familiar with TerraPower or X Energy. Those are two that get, a fair amount of attention in the media. They're trying to use different technological approaches, and this relates mainly to what is used to moderate the nuclear reaction and to cool the system. So, is it water? Is it liquid metal or molten salt? There are a variety of different technologies. Some of the reactor designs are so-called fast reactors, uh, where the neutrons are kind of flying out of the
Mhm.
fission reaction, as the uranium splits apart at kind of high speeds, and that has a variety of consequences. There are also, I mentioned X energy, they're like gas-cooled
Mhm.
reactors, and the X energy design is an interesting one because it's not only capable of producing electricity, but it's also operating at very high temperatures, so you can use the heat. And that design is something that is being built actually. The first units at a chemical plant at a Dow Chemical facility in Texas because they want the heat. So and sorry, last point, where the modularity comes in because that's also part of the name. There's kind of a concept that you could use, more than one of these reactors at the same site, and maybe you would have 8 or 10 or 12, or in the case of some of the micro reactors, you might even have more than that, a really large number in a particular geographical area. So there are really a lot of just many more options, both in terms of size and in terms of technology.
That's really interesting because when we think of a reactor, nuclear reactor, it's usually like this gigantic, like big land property, right? But now we hear that there are different technology, different sizes, different designs. So it sounds to me that it's pretty competitive, or it's getting competitive in the market. And in 2024, the US Congress passed the act, the Advance Act, which lets OECD countries like South Korea apply for NRC licenses to own or operate US nuclear plants. Under Trump administration, are we actually seeing this used? And do South Koreans companies now have a realistic shot? Because you mentioned different companies, but I think those are mainly US companies.
Right, right, right. So I think in thinking about the Advance Act, it's important to keep in mind that when we use the words nuclear facility,
Mhm.
that can mean a lot of different things. And one of the things that it can mean is a nuclear power plant, with nuclear reactors. But there's also another thing that it can mean, which is an enrichment or recycling, reprocessing facility. And I would make kind of a significant distinction between those two things, as we sort of explore the Advance Act and, what we're kind of seeing sooner and what may take a little bit more time. So, um, you know, if we zero in, first on the fuel cycle, uh, you know, the Trump administration and the United States generally have been working hard to build up America's domestic fuel cycle capabilities. And this was really something that the first Trump administration started to focus on toward the end of the administration. The Energy Department released a pretty significant report about that. And certainly, again, when Russia invaded Ukraine and the United States and others kind of decided that they didn't want to buy Russian nuclear fuel anymore. uh, that that required some kind of significant changes here and elsewhere, and also kind of pushes in the direction of building up these domestic fuel cycle capabilities. And you see, one foreign company, Urenco,
Mhm.
which is, pursuing already, enrichment in the United States. There's another European, actually French company, Orano, that's at the beginning of kind of an important new project on the fuel cycle. So those things are happening already. Um, when you talk about, a foreign company, building, owning, operating nuclear plants in the United States, like a nuclear power plant, what the legislation really does is to open up the possibility for licensing,
Mhm.
right? And uh, and license and applying for a license, I think, is sort of more or maybe more attractive to some, if they can own the plant and operate it and everything else, and not just build it. Um, that is, more complicated and time consuming, I think, partly because of the licensing process and because that licensing process is in a little bit of disarray right now. The licensing process for the fuel cycle facilities is fairly straightforward, I think, complicated, time consuming, but straightforward. The licensing pathway for nuclear reactors is complicated because, many Americans have been frustrated with it. Companies have been frustrated with it. There's been an effort to try to create an alternative pathway that's more suitable to the new technologies. That hasn't really worked. As a country, we're kind of in the middle of trying to make a variety of changes in these systems at the same time that, we want to like license and build a lot of things. So it's not the easiest environment, although hopefully that will stabilize. Uh,
Mhm.
Moving from licensing to actually kind of building and operating something, um, you know, I think I'm certainly excited that that possibility now exists, and I think it is a real opportunity. It's not an easy thing to do. And it's especially not an easy thing to do for a foreign company, to find a site, to get a local community, that's supportive of the project, to get a license, to get financing together, it's not the easiest thing. So I think that has been progressing more slowly, than we have seen on the fuel cycle side, and I think that we are kind of likely to see in the future, that that track is going to be slower than the other track. But
Mhm.
I certainly do consider it to be a real opportunity. Um, there's another complicating factor, which is, I think every country around the world in the nuclear area has sort of a preference for its own things. Um, I hope that that is something that will change, and not only in the United States, by the way, but also in other places. But that is a complicating factor.
I mean, I mean, you did a fantastic job of just kind of segregating, all the kind of like the factors or the aspects of, like the enrichment, processing and licensing and building and operating. Like, like my question was very broad. So I'm gonna zoom out a little bit, and then I wanna ask you about the possible cooperation between South Korea and the U.S. in third country markets. Could you give one concrete example of that kind of cooperation might look like?
Sure, sure. Well, look, I mean, I think there are a lot of different possibilities, and maybe I will just highlight two, actually, rather than one.
Awesome, yeah.
Actually, sorry. Well, no, two. I'll just stick to two. I'll stick to two.
Okay.
Okay, so one is, there are a lot of American companies that want to build their designs overseas.
Mhm.
Uh, the U.S. nuclear manufacturing supply chain today, and also actually, by the way, the workforce today are still limited. And if everybody's ideas succeed and everybody gets contracts at the same time, the United States isn't going to be able to build all of that alone. So I think there could be, a very significant Korean, workforce and supply chain contribution in the construction of U.S. designs around the world, in third countries.
Mhm.
There's also a second possibility, though, Korean designs. Okay.
Mhm.
So, how can the United States be involved in Korean designs? Well, one way is that, there was of course, a dispute between some Korean firms and Westinghouse,
Yes.
and they reached an agreement that resolved that dispute, and the agreement kind of governs some of their future relationship and define certain terms for that. So there's that. But also, at least today, if Korean companies go overseas and build new reactors somewhere, uh, Korea does not have its own complete fuel cycle capability. And that's a contribution that the United States might be able to make, especially as the U.S. Fuel cycle kind of expands. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of energy and actually a fair amount of money going into making that happen.
So it sounds like there are two ways that we can possibly cooperate. And let's say that cooperation between South Korea and the US deepens. Where do you see potential coordination challenges or political frictions, such as Buy America rules or export credit policies or different industrial priorities on each side?
Right, 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 right. Well, um, you know, this question and the previous one, I think these are, and they're linked, of course. These are really important and for me at least, very intellectually engaging questions. We're in a period, if we kind of zoom out to the macro global level, we're in this period of really intensifying geopolitical competition. And the United States, kind of broadly speaking, without looking at sort of any particular step, because there are some particular things that we do that work in the opposite direction. But in totality, I think the United States is trying to strengthen its relationships with allies and to strengthen the capabilities of America's allies. Uh, so that we will all be in a better position to contend with this competition that we face, which is partly a security competition and partly an economic competition. So that's the environment that we're operating in.
Mhm.
Uh, the challenge that we face is that the alliances that we have, whether it's the NATO alliance or the US Korea alliance, the US Japan alliance, America has a number of other allies and partners. Our alliances are security alliances that we established because of shared security interests and shared security concerns. So we want those alliances also to be economic alliances. That's harder. Our economic interests and economic concerns don't overlap in the same way that our security interests and our security concerns overlap. And in practice, we have kind of a situation in which we want to cooperate and also to compete at the same time. From a policy perspective, and actually, from a political perspective, because, everything eventually becomes political, especially when you're talking about economics, jobs, exports, all this other stuff. Um, this is like really a serious challenge, and I actually view it as one of the fundamental challenges of the age that we're living in today. I do think that it is a soluble challenge. Um, it's not easy to solve because we have democratic political systems. So, we face kind of political pressures. We have market-driven economies. And, there's kind of a spectrum among the United States and its allies for kind of the government role in the economy. But fundamentally, we want to have market economies, and that imposes, especially where the United States is concerned, constraints on what the government can do to manage things like this. Um, but I do think it's entirely possible to find solutions, and they fundamentally revolve around things like consortia and other kinds of approaches that help to align economic interests that might not otherwise be aligned, or to better align them, to more closely align. I think those are the kind of the tools that we need to be looking for.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's really interesting that security alliance is not really overlapping with the economic alliance, but yet countries are trying to navigate this uncertain tough time right now. And I think that the example is the South Korea's the recent summit last October in Gyeongju, if you remember. You know you mentioned nuclear fuel cycle, and I kind of want to go back there actually, because the last summit talked about the nuclear fuel cycle. And since then, there's been renewed focus in South Korea on advancing the nuclear fuel cycle. So what should South Korean lawmakers understand about the US position on uranium enrichment or spent fuel reprocessing? Do you see,
Sure, sure, sure.
yeah,
Oh,
do you see
sorry.
any,
Go ahead.
it's okay. Do you see any realistic path to updating the ROK-US 123 agreement in the coming years?
Let me come to that in just a second. I want to say one more
Yeah,
thing about this kind of cooperation, competition, and
please.
interests
Yeah.
in geopolitics. Um, you know, on one hand, we have this situation where our kind of economic interests don't fully align with our security interests in our partnership. But I would say, on the other hand, there can be, real risks to countries that allow the the gap between their security interests and their economic interests to be too great. And I want to give just one example of that, which is Ukraine. And Ukraine, uh, uh, before 2014, when Russia, seized Crimea and started sending personnel into eastern Ukraine and supporting the separatist movements there, Ukraine wanted to align itself with the United States and NATO uh, uh, in security matters, much of the time, not all the time. Its leadership varied, but that was the general direction that Ukraine was headed in. Uh, but Russia was Ukraine's largest trading partner,
Mm.
and it didn't work. So I think uh, that factor, that example is an important example, I think, for everyone to keep in mind about sort of allowing your security interests and your economic interests to get kind of too far apart, because it can have really significant consequences. Turning to the fuel cycle and the U.S. Korea 123 agreement, certainly the joint fact sheet, I think it was, that the United States and Korea released after the summit here. Um, it appeared to crack open the door to that discussion. Um, the Like all diplomatic documents, there was sort of a certain flexibility in the text, I think, that allows for it to be interpreted in two different ways. One interpretation of the document is that it's kind of opening up a pathway to renegotiating the agreement. Another interpretation of the document is that it is kind of signaling a more permissive American attitude within the framework of the existing agreement. Okay. And I don't think we will really know which one it is for a little while.
Mhm.
It's going to take some time for the administration to clarify that. They're complicated issues. However, um, you know, that discussion won't be happening in a vacuum. I think the United States is likely to be pursuing a number of other 123 agreements around the world. And, if and when the U.S. announces other agreements, I assume that people in Korea will be very attentive to what's in those agreements. Uh, And depending on the nature of some of those other agreements and who they're with, uh, that could certainly sort of affect the dynamics of the bilateral U.S. Korea conversation. Um, my impression, at least where President Trump is concerned, uh, is that, he there are a number of things that he wants from others, and I think his sort of statements and policies so far have made fairly clear what those things are.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think the other thing that we can tell about President Trump is that when he is kind of pursuing things that he wants, he's sort of prepared to negotiate.
Mhm.
So uh, again, I don't think we know how this is going to turn out yet, and uh, uh, actually conducting negotiations like that, it's complicated, it's time consuming. It's kind of a very intricate interagency process, on both sides to formulate what the positions are. Um, but it certainly seems to me that there could be a possibility to change the terms of the current understanding. And I think time will tell whether it's kind of more flexibility over the next several years within the current framework, and then a new agreement when it runs out, or something new sooner than that.
Mhm. So, we just talked about fuel cycle, and, that's actually connects directly to the submarine issues from that same summit, right? So, there's some big growing attention on possible US support for South Korean nuclear powered submarine project. What are the main technical, political, and alliance related hurdles that remain? And based on those, like, how does civilian nuclear cooperation tie into this military challenge?
Sure, sure, sure. Well, look, I think there are kind of, ultimately there's sort of three big issues at stake here. Uh, One is just nuclear submarine technology generally, and the U.S. Sharing of that.
Mm.
Um, Then there's a second set of issues that you kind of alluded to there surrounding the fuel cycle. The nuclear reactors in submarines have to be very small. From a certain perspective, those were actually kind of the first small modular reactors, although they're not really operated in a modular way. There's the but or not in the way that we sort of think of, but uh, they are kind of small designs. They have to be packed into this teeny ship that goes way
Mm.
down under the water. And uh, Because they're small, and by the way, like many of the other small modular reactor designs, uh, they don't use low enriched uranium like kind of a traditional again like an APR 1400 reactor in Korea. They need nuclear fuel that has more sort of energy per unit of volume in it, which means it needs to be more enriched.
Mhm.
And certainly the U.S. nuclear submarines are using highly enriched uranium, as I understand it. I think there has been some discussion of Korea's design not using uranium that's enriched to quite that level, but it still needs to be enriched more than um,
Mhm.
what one would use for an onshore, traditional reactor. So that connects to the issue that we were just talking about, will Korea kind of be able to manufacture, enrich and manufacture its own fuel for the submarine fleet that the country aspires to build, or not, and that's something that kind of has to be worked out. And then the third set of issues are, of course, the political issues. Where does it get built? Who's in the supply chain? How many jobs in Philadelphia? How many jobs, in the Korean shipbuilding industry on the Korean Peninsula? Um, President Trump has kind of indicated what his preference is. It seems that those issues aren't yet fully worked out. And again, that gets to this broader issue that we've been talking about of the sort of cooperate, compete, and everybody wants to, buy and build their own things and employ their own people.
So, like, as we're having this conversation, I'm learning that nuclear energy policy or the field is really complicated. It's not just with the technology, but then there's a layers of policies and politics that are involved, and a lot of like different actors too.
Oh, sure. That absolutely. Well, that's what makes it so interesting.
It's fascinating. I'm learning so much here. So, here's my last question for today. From your perspective, what's the one concrete action South Korean policymakers could take to strengthen South Korea's role as a key partner in the US nuclear revival?
Well, it's probably not really for me to advise the Korean Parliament, but I'll just highlight, I think, three things, actually, rather than one, three things that I think, the Trump administration has pretty strongly expressed interest in, generally. And actually, I think pretty much any American administration, in broadly speaking, would have similar priorities. Uh, Investing in the United States, workforce development in the United States, market access in Korea.
Mhm.
So I think that if there are steps that the National Assembly can take, to encourage or facilitate additional Korean investment in the U.S. nuclear sector, in manufacturing here and constructing plants here. Certainly, that's one area to think about. Steps that could be taken to, support U.S. efforts to develop the workforce that we need in the United States, through training, and that this can there are kind of multiple tracks for that. Uh, People who make and build things. So, the people who are working in the factories making the nuclear components, uh, people who do the designs, nuclear engineers, um, and then, the people who are like operating the facilities, running the plant. There, I think the U.S. is, probably in a somewhat stronger position because, the Navy, we have a lot of kind of skilled reactor operators. But if the sector really expands in the way that, many hope and expect it will, I think that's also an area where we will need help. And then thirdly, the market access point, right? So, I mean, we talked about the Advance Act, sort of opening up the opportunity for OECD members to kind of get licenses, own and operate nuclear facilities in the United States. That's not really something, as I understand it, that exists in Korea today. I assume it would be uh, somewhat more controversial in Korea than it was in the United States to pass that law. But this is an administration, I mean, the Trump administration that is going around the world looking at reciprocity.
Mhm.
And I certainly do think that, there could be great benefits to Korea, in terms of like American investment, for example, and new technology and other things that could flow from something like that.
Mhm.
Plus, by the way, if that happens, kind of accelerating Korea's own efforts to reduce emissions, which, as I understand it, is a high priority for the Lee government.
I think that, the investment, workforce and the reciprocity market access into Korea, I think that those are the three things that have been talked a lot, right? So it's something we definitely need to keep in mind. So
Yeah.
Paul, thank you very much for sharing your insights today. This has been incredibly helpful for understanding how U.S. nuclear policy is evolving and what it means for the cooperation between South Korea and the U.S. going forward. I really appreciate your time and perspective. And thank you to everyone watching online.